The life cycle of your candidate industry is important to understand as well. And when we look at life cycle, we're going to look at it in the context of industry status and its impact on your success as an entrepreneur. When we explore the industry, we've talked about industry conditions and specifically the knowledge and demand factors. Now we're going to transition to industry status and think about the influence of life cycle and structure. This gives us some insights into the rules of that industry, as well as some of the hurdles that we may face. And within the opportunity analysis canvas, this will introduce our discussion of the fifth element of industry status. So, life cycle. It's similar to what you would expect. It's the stage of development of an industry. And the life cycle is going to influence your success because it impacts how existing and new competitors are going to behave and react to your entry. It comes in several categories. In this example, it starts with research and development. You may have a limited monopoly if you're an early entrant. The second phase is growth. You begin to launch your product in the market, and other competitors enter the market as well. The third stage is maturity. You have essentially reached a peak of competition, and you yourself may face somewhat lower production and somewhat lower revenues than you may have when you were in that growth phase. And then lastly is decline, whereas there are simply too many options for the market. There are too many competitors for all to survive, and you see some winding down of that opportunity. Now, other elements, when you look at life cycle, may break them into young, middle-aged, and old as well. The curve is very similar. And we want to, as startups, recognize there's tremendous value to being towards the front of that curve. It's not to say that if you're not the first entrant, that there's no opportunity, but I would argue if there are 10 or 20 or 30 other companies already in the space that may be trying to do the same thing you're trying to do, and particularly if they're trying to achieve it the same way, that might not be the product opportunity that I would at least pursue. So let's look at this. You're familiar with Hollywood. You may be familiar with Bollywood. You may or may not be familiar with Nollywood. So we're going to take a look at this. And the element to take away here is to realize that as industries are birthed, mature, and decline, there may be an opportunity for that industry to reemerge in other geographic regions. That's the case that we're going to talk about here, and we're going to watch the first couple of minutes, and then we'll post the rest of the talk online for you.
I have a story that I would like to share with you, and it's an African story. It is a story of hope, resilience, and glamour. There was Hollywood, then came Bollywood. Today, we have Nollywood, the third largest film industry in the world. In 2006 alone, almost 2,000 films were made in Nigeria. Now try to imagine 40, 50 films wrapped, distributed every week in the streets of Lagos, Nigeria, and West Africa. Some estimates put the value of this industry at $250 million. It has created thousands, if not tens of thousands of jobs. And it's expanding. But keep in mind that this was a grassroots movement. This is something that happened without foreign investment, without government aid. And actually it happened against all odds. In one of the most difficult moment in Nigerian economy. The industry is 15 years old. And so maybe you're thinking now, how an Italian filmmaker based in Boston is so interested in this story. And so I think I have to tell you just a few words, a few things about my personal life, and because I think there is a connection. My grandfather lived most of his life and is buried in Zambia. My father also lived most of his adult life in East Africa, and I was born in Zambia.
So one of our key takeaways here is that the life cycle influences the cost of entry and the rules of competition within an industry. And depending on the maturity, if you're early, it can be very affordable. It can be relatively easy from a financial standpoint and much more cost-effective for entrepreneurs to enter and compete successfully if they are early entrants into an industry. Inversely, if it's a middle or late stage industry, they may already be dominated by large and established competitors. They may have economies of scale already established. They may have a brand and partnerships and distribution already built. And it can be very expensive, very complicated, and potentially not very profitable to be a startup in that environment. So we want to favor being an early entrant and participating in the benefits of being at the front of that life cycle. What that means in context, when you look at a few of the metrics for Nollywood, is the estimated annual revenues of the Nigerian film industry is $590 million. There are further investment mechanisms and loan mechanisms funded by the government to try and increase and grow that. We see that there are 50 films produced in Nigeria weekly. And the average cost of them are somewhere between $25,000 and $70,000. In contrast, a top Hollywood film, $250 million. An average Hollywood film, maybe something in the order of $50 million. So you're still comparing thousands to millions when you are looking at the relative cost of entry and operation within these different areas. And the opportunity to distribute online may bring a very attractive audience as well. So the production in a country by no means limits its market and the customer base to that country. I want to take a different look at another firm that I'm very familiar with, a company called Fiscal Note. So I'll let Tim, their CEO and co-founder, introduce you to Fiscal Note and what they're doing as far as being a leader in a very new industry.
How did you realize that there was a market, if you like, for this kind of government predictive ability and build a company around that?
Yeah, sure. So I have a lot of experience in tech and in politics, and I think while I was in DC and working for the past couple of years running a national advocacy organization, I realized that there was a lot of uncertainty. And I think when we went back to our constituents, when we started working with other partners, we realized that a lot of this information, especially at the state and local levels, wasn't traveling well enough to enterprises.
Okay, so I mean, essentially, just to describe the product, I mean, this is a real-time data analysis platform, right?
Right. Essentially, what we do is we aggregate legislation from all 50 states, major cities around the United States. We're at about 10 cities now, rolling it out to hopefully 86,000 cities across the United States. And essentially, what we want to do is categorize that legislation into specific industry verticals, and then tell each of our enterprise partners exactly how these pieces of legislation might impact their business and what the likelihood of each piece of legislation passing is.
All right, so this is more, though, a local focus, right, Tim? Because I know that you've said in the past the federal issues are completely different beasts, right?
Right. I think, when you look at sort of the debt ceiling debate, when you look at sort of the shutdown, these are fairly big anomalies that happen in our economy. But I think when you look at more at the state and local levels, there are a lot of issues that need to be tackled, whether it's zoning, whether it's tax credits around specific industries. And a lot of times, businesses and enterprise are just not taking advantage of a lot of those opportunities.
So, Tim, what's been the hardest thing about building your product? It's still relatively new.
Yeah. So I think, anytime you get into artificial intelligence and machine learning, you're always hungry for more data. And so we're going out, we're aggregating hundreds of thousands of different data sets to try and include in our algorithms. But, once you get more and more into the data, government data starts to sort of get a little bit more tricky. So you're getting into sort of paper data sets, floppy disks, CDs, things that people have traditionally put data on, but now that we're trying to incorporate that data, it's just getting to be a lot more of a headache.
So basically, you can't hire any kids anyway, but there's tons of kids out there who don't even know what disks look like. But Tim, as far as next steps, what are they?
Yeah, so the next steps for us, we're planning on going international with this. There are a lot of municipalities and regions in different countries that have similar information asymmetries. So Germany, France, Brazil, China just came back from a trip from Beijing, and all of them are witnessing sort of very similar problems. And so we are planning on rolling this out probably in the next 2 to 3 years around in different countries around the world.
So Fiscal Note is using a proprietary database that they've developed of legislation and advanced predictive analytics to sell to companies and organizations to search, discover, and forecast state and federal legislation. This lets them monitor trends in different industries or states that those companies or organizations are interested in. And it leverages machine learning algorithms that Fiscal Note has developed to discover new developments relevant to your company or organization, as well as to anticipate what may come and what it means to you. So when you think about the life cycle, one way to consider it is how many companies are out there doing the same thing. How many companies are out there that are using some measure of big data and machine learning and analytics to examine state and federal legislation? For me, the answer was not many, arguably none, the way that they're doing it. So they're very much on the front end of this market. What that lets them do, being on the very front, is to build a strong team. So beyond the 3 co-founders, including Jonathan Chen, the CTO, that I work most closely here as a student at the University of Maryland, they were able to build a very strong advisory team. An advisory team from some companies that you may know, like Elsevier and LegalZoom. An advisory team of federal expertise, people that had worked in the White House, people that had worked at the State Department, people that understood the market that they were pursuing and had the relationships to help facilitate that. They also were able to secure some notable investors. Mark Cuban, Jerry Yang, one of the co-founders of Yahoo, as well as venture capital. So as students, as full-time students in the fall of their senior year, they were able to raise $1.2 million in venture funding from NEA and first-round capital. So in that way, by being new, by being at the very front of that industry life cycle, they were able to attract and bring in talent and funding that had they been the 10th company or the 20th company to do it 2 or 3 years from now, they probably would not have been able to get the advisors nor get the funding that they've been able to access as an early entrant. So what we see there is that new ventures perform best in young industries. There's substantially less competition by definition. And the competition is often small, thereby giving a more level playing field to new entrants. It also gives you somewhat of a common learning curve. When everyone is new, there are no old competitors. There are no established leaders. There aren't decades of experience. There isn't partnerships and exclusivity agreements that are already in play. There aren't distribution channels that are already locked up. It's somewhat of an open playing field that you can compete with and compete on somewhat equal footing. So in summary, when we think about life cycle, it influences the competitive environment of the venture and your overall success substantially. Young industries present multiple advantages for new entrants. And while it's not known, while you do have to give significant consideration to what may happen, how to establish, there's not a lot of precedent for what will work. I would argue that while that is a challenge, there's still more ultimate upside to enter and participate in the young industry and in industries that are very early in those life cycles.